Hey guys, I just wanted to give an extra intro to this video because this was pre-filmed about 3 weeks ago and I didn't even really consider the timing of when the Apprentice video would come out in relation to the election. It just hadn't crossed my mind because I pre-filmed it in preparation to move across the country. But I probably would have been a little more aggressive about my Donald Trump opinions if I had considered the timing of this. And I'm now filming this intro the day after the election and the video goes up on Monday when you're seeing this. But I ultimately, I do want to say, my opinions are pretty consistent within this video and still now, which is that Donald Trump is an awful, cruel, bigoted piece of shit, and I still think the crux of my commentary remains the same, which is that he is both at the core of it an awful person, but also the second point of that the American system allows for and encourages corrupt behaviour, which is what I really wanted to say in this video and what I did say a lot in this video. But yeah, I just didn't want to release it without this additional mention of the election and how I think a lot of us are feeling currently about the state of the world, even from where I am here in New Zealand. But yeah, I hope you still enjoy the video. I ultimately do think the commentary is good, and I think The Apprentice as a film is very good, and I think it's even more important now, the commentary it presents. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, so today I'm here to talk about The Apprentice. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about with this film because of the film covering Donald Trump's rise in the 70s and 80s and his relationship with Roy Cohn, and essentially looks at, one, on a human level, how these people are to begin with, how much of the corruption is human nature, but also how much of it is due to the American system encouraging corrupt behaviour. So I have a lot of thoughts, so I'll get straight into it with my thoughts on the film as a whole. I think it was very good. I think it achieved what it set out to do ultimately, which was to show us a young Donald Trump and how he developed into what we understand him to be now. And so I think it did that job very effectively. I don't really have any negatives to say about the film other than it's just very good. It's very well made. Yeah, just achieves what it needs to. And it doesn't overstay its welcome either in doing that, which I think was good. Yeah, the pace was good. The film was very well focused, especially for the first two acts. I would say towards the end it starts to meander a little, but I think that muddled sense may in part be due to because of where Trump is at that point. I think in the early stages when Donald Trump and Roy Cohn are so closely attached to each other, it's a very focused film, but once we see their relationship fracture and we see how Trump's rise kind of coincides with Roy Cohn's fall, I think that's where the film starts to drift a little. But in saying that, I still do think it was a very well-paced and well-focused film for the most part. Also, the writing is very good. I think the writing of the film, again, captures what it needs to. I think just in general, everything about the film just does what it needs to do effectively. Nothing is mind-blowingly amazing, but at the same time nothing is bad. It just achieves what it needs to, and that goes for the writing as well. The writing is very good. It's very engaging. There's no point in this film where I was bored with the dialogue or anything. And I also do think an important thing to highlight is Ali Abbasi's direction. His directing was great in this. I would really like to see more work from him. I need to look at what other films he's made because this is the first time I've watched a film of his, but he's a very good director, really interesting. He knows what things deserve focus, I think, really well without overdoing anything. There are some shots of this film that are just gorgeous. I also think the direction is good because it keeps the film quite grounded. There's nothing too over the top or grandiose, except when we're really highlighting those things when it matters. I think in general the film is very grounded, which I think serves this origin story very well. And yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with Abasi's direction. Now on to the performances. The performances in this film were fantastic across the board. I think everyone really stepped up to the plate for a film that obviously hinges so much on these performances. But in particular, Sebastian Stan as Donald Trump was fantastic. He was so good. He managed to get enough of the Trump mannerisms and like tendencies without doing the caricature that we see a lot of people do now. And yeah, he was just fascinating. I think he really showed us his development super well too. Like at the beginning we just kind of see a bumbling idiot in Trump a lot of the time, who is just like greedy and power hungry but doesn't really know how to achieve those things yet. And then we see over time his mannerisms develop slowly, and we see more of the Trump-isms that we know now. And then by the end of the film, Sebastian Stan just is the Donald Trump we know in this. And yeah, his performance was fantastic. Really, yeah, did it justice, I think, for what this film required. Now I'm going to talk about Jeremy Strong as Roy Cohn, which going into this, knew Jeremy Strong was going to be fantastic. Succession is my favourite show of all time. I mean, the poster's up there behind me. Like, I love Jeremy Strong. I'll watch anything he's in. I think he is a fantastic actor. Probably one of the great actors we have right now that doesn't get the credit for that as much as he deserves. But he was so good in this. He was just so engaging. Every time he was on screen as Roy Cohn, he just took up space in a way that you couldn't stop watching him. Like, he was so disturbing and like evil. Like, to begin with, you just like, this man is truly evil and awful. But he still feels human though. I think Strong did a really great job of still making him feel human. And that, because I think to portray someone who's this objectively bad, it could quite easily become very over the top. But he is so human to the point that there are events later in the film that we almost start to feel a little sympathy for Roy Cohn, even though we shouldn't, because he is ultimately an awful human being. But Strong's performance has the kind of nuance that allowed us to feel both that he was human and feel sympathy for things that genuinely deserve it, while also understanding he is a horrific figure. And yeah, I think that's what both of their performances do, actually. Both Sebastian Stan and Jeremy Strong are really good at making these figures feel human and grounded, and like people you could sympathise with on a basic human level without ever ignoring the fact that they are awful and deserve all of the criticism they've received for decades now. Now I'm obviously going to talk about the external context of the film before going into my other commentary, because for obvious reasons this film was very controversial. It nearly wasn't allowed to be released at all in the US. Distributors didn't want it, streamers didn't want it, for the obvious reasons that a biopic about Donald Trump was always going to be a very controversial film to make. And I really do appreciate that this group of people that did end up making this were willing to take the risk of this film, because I do think what it shows is very necessary to our understanding of Donald Trump. I think it helps to round out our understanding, and so he feels less like a vague figure and more like a real person who at the core of it is still awful. And I think part of the reason too why people found the film controversial and were against it was because Ali Abbasi, as well as the whole cast, have made it very clear that the point of this film is to humanise these figures. I think people have misconstrued that as meaning to endear them to an audience. However, the film does not endear them to you at all. I think humanizing them simply makes us understand that, like, at a base level, these people were awful. I think humanizing them almost makes how horrific their actions are so much worse, and what we know of both Trump and Cohn so much worse when we fully understand that these are people at a basic level, because they have, you know, when you gain a certain amount of power, you kind of become this more, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a less permanent figure. It's something that moves in a very strange way. It feels less human, and I think the film achieves its goal very successfully of humanizing them, however not endearing them. So I think what this film really highlights, and what it does very well in discussing, is how the American system as a whole encourages corrupt behaviour. That in order to gain a certain level of wealth and power in the United States, you have to be willing to make choices that are morally and ethically bankrupt, and engage in this level of corruption. I think it highlights how, while yes, at the core of it, these figures are also bad, but the system almost requires it for a certain level of success, and most certainly encourages it. Even if on the face of it they act as though they are discouraging said behaviour, it is abundantly clear that the American system thrives on corrupt behaviour, lies, blackmail, manipulation. We see Roy Cohn especially really engage in these and explain to Trump how it is necessary for him to engage in said behaviour, and that it's almost accepted within these circles because it is a means of achieving the success that they are seeking out. And I do think it's interesting as well that the film shows us that, like, Donald Trump always had something cruel and awful at the core of him. I truly believe that. However, he was a bumbling idiot, really, in these early stages. But what this film shows is how the American system encouraged this corruption and also preyed upon his idiocy in this way that they were able to build him into what we understand him to be. They were able to mold him into what they wanted, especially from the perspective of Roy Cohn. Like, he saw something in Trump that was easily malleable and that he could use to further himself, but it also would further Donald Trump as well. And so I think it shows how the system encourages that as a whole. I think it was like Jeremy Strong said it best during press for this film, where he described both Roy Cohn and Donald Trump as archetypally American. And I think that description really says it all about how these figures are awful, but there's also something distinctly American about it, and that is that specific system that really allows for the kind of behaviour that these figures engaged in. I also want to talk about the other main idea I got from the film, which was the question of whether Donald Trump's behaviour is solely due to his inherent nature versus like how much is due to the external influences of people like Roy Cohn and the American system. Like, how much of a figure like Donald Trump is due to his own human nature, and how much of it is due to what he was surrounded by and how he was moulded by the system, as we've discussed. I think it's a very interesting question. I don't know if I have a complete answer. I think the answer is probably it's somewhere in the middle. He, for sure, at the core of it, like, is a truly awful person. We know this, you know, he's bigoted and cruel and selfish and greedy, and we see all of these things on display in this film. I think that's what the film does really well, is it is a cold, hard look at this. It is, you know, just awful to watch, and that is so direct in telling us, like, he at the core of it is bad. But I also do think it shows how the external influences of the system, and Roy Cohn in particular, also furthered his corruption, furthered this behaviour. And it's interesting to ask, I guess, how far he would have gone in that direction on his own without these influences, because he still would have become, you know, a bad man, a truly awful fucking human. But I do think that it's somewhere in the middle of how his human nature versus the external influence of the system as we see it, and through his relationship with Roy Cohn. Ultimately, this film is analysing the relationship between Donald Trump and Roy Cohn, and I think it's very interesting, as I mentioned before, how it shows Donald Trump's rise versus Roy Cohn's fall, and how those kind of, like, there's a point where those intersect, and we see, especially towards the end of the film, you know, what this looks like, how they in some ways switch positions. Like, they are both still corrupt and evil, but we see the further we go on, Trump becomes less and less of a real person as he gains more and more, versus Roy Cohn in some ways feels more human as he loses things. You know, it's showing us that the system breeds and encourages this corruption, and that as you gain more from it, you know, become less and less of a real human being, because you are so caught up in this corrupt behaviour. But that when they have less, you still see glimpses of a real person there, even though at the core of it they're still a bad person. And I do think it's interesting that the film poses these questions around who Donald Trump was and is, and the system as a whole, and how those things have ultimately worked together to form the Donald Trump that we now understand, the one we now see all the time. And I think the film, has done a very good job of showing us how someone can become this. Like, the primary story we're watching here is how a person who already has, the right traits built in to be this way, what happens when they, find themselves within a system that also encourages the behaviour that they partake in. But yeah, that's all from me. Quite a short video for this, because the film, covers a very simple, basic idea, and I don't think I need to say too much more about it. I think everyone should watch The Apprentice to get a really good, well-rounded understanding of Donald Trump. I think it really helps to round out our understanding of his origins. I also do think too, it's interesting to watch Roy Cohn. He's such an interesting figure, there's so much you could talk about with him, and I would love to see more media actually discuss him, because there are so many ways we could analyse Roy Cohn. But yeah, that'll be all from me. I hope you enjoyed this video, even if it was a shorter one. But yeah, if you liked the video, please hit the like button, and if you'd like to see more from me, please subscribe. You can also follow me on my social media as always, they'll be linked below. Instagram, TikTok, the usual. You can see my makeup and special effects work there too. But yeah, that's all. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.